Welcome back to Historical Repo, your home for the most incredible stories from our past. Today, we're journeying back to a moment of unimaginable crisis, a time when the fate of an entire continent hung precariously in the balance. We're going to tell the untold story of three men whose names are largely forgotten by history, but whose actions prevented a catastrophe of apocalyptic proportions. This is the story of the Chernobyl Divers, the three men who swam into the heart of a nuclear meltdown to save Europe. In the early hours of April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Soviet Ukraine exploded. The blast ripped through the facility, releasing a plume of radioactive material that would drift across the continent. It was, and remains, the worst nuclear disaster in human history. As firefighters and plant workers battled the inferno, a new, even more terrifying threat began to emerge deep within the bowels of the shattered reactor building. The core of the reactor, a molten mass of nuclear fuel and other materials called corium, was melting its way through the concrete floor. Directly beneath the reactor was a massive pool of water, a bubbler pool that was part of the plant's safety system. The smoldering, superheated corium was inching closer and closer to this water. If it made contact, the result would be a thermal, or steam, explosion of immense power. Scientists calculated the terrifying potential of such an event. The resulting blast would have vaporized the remaining reactors at the plant, sending a colossal cloud of radioactive isotopes high into the atmosphere. The fallout would have rendered a vast portion of Europe, from Ukraine to Germany and beyond, completely uninhabitable for centuries. The contamination would have poisoned the land, the water, and the air, leading to an unimaginable loss of life. It would have been a nuclear apocalypse, dwarfing the initial explosion in its destructive scale. The world held its breath as the clock ticked down. There was only one way to prevent this second, more devastating explosion. Someone had to get to the basement, navigate the flooded, lightless corridors, and manually open the sluice gates to drain the water. It was a suicide mission. The water in the basement was lethally radioactive, a toxic soup that would deliver a fatal dose of radiation within minutes. The call for volunteers went out among the plant workers and soldiers on site. They were told the truth of the mission: success meant saving millions of lives, but the personal cost would almost certainly be their own. Three men stepped forward. Their names were Valery Bespalov, a senior engineer, Alexei Ananenko, an engineer who knew the location of the valves, and Boris Baranov, a shift supervisor. They knew the plant, they knew the layout of the labyrinthine tunnels, and they knew the stakes. Equipped with little more than wetsuits, rudimentary respirators, and flashlights, the three men prepared to descend into the abyss. They were heading into a flooded basement filled with radioactive water, with no guarantee of finding the valves or even making it back out alive. The world above watched and waited. The fate of millions rested on the shoulders of these three ordinary men, about to perform an act of extraordinary bravery. They waded into the darkness, their flashlights cutting feeble beams through the murky, contaminated water. The corridors were a maze of pipes and debris from the explosion. The water rose around them as they pushed deeper into the plant's underbelly. Their dosimeters, instruments that measure radiation exposure, clicked frantically, a constant reminder of the invisible poison they were swimming through. Time was their enemy. Every second spent in the water increased their radiation dose to fatal levels. They had to find the valves quickly. Ananenko, relying on his memory of the plant's blueprints, led the way through the submerged labyrinth. Finally, after what must have felt like an eternity, they found them. The two crucial sluice gates that would drain the bubbler pool and avert the steam explosion. Working together in the pitch black, radioactive water, they struggled to turn the stiff wheels of the valves. With immense effort, the valves began to turn. They heard the sound they had risked everything for, the gush of water beginning to drain from the pool. They had done it. The water level started to recede, pulling the threat of a steam explosion back from the brink. Their mission was a success, but their ordeal was not over. They still had to make their way back out of the flooded, radioactive maze. Exhausted and having absorbed a massive dose of radiation, they retraced their steps, emerging from the darkness into the arms of their waiting comrades. They were hailed as heroes. The water drained completely over the next day, and the immediate threat of a continent-wide catastrophe was averted. Valery Bespalov, Alexei Ananenko, and Boris Baranov had stared into the face of a nuclear apocalypse and did not blink. For decades, the story circulated that the three men died from acute radiation sickness within weeks of their heroic dive. This narrative cemented their status as martyrs who made the ultimate sacrifice. But the truth, in this case, is more complex and, in some ways, even more remarkable. Contrary to the popular myth, all three men survived. They did suffer from severe radiation sickness, and their health was forever impacted by the dose they received. Boris Baranov passed away in 2005 from a heart attack. However, Valery Bespalov and Alexei Anonenko were still alive as of recent years. They lived relatively quiet lives, their monumental act of bravery largely uncelebrated by the wider world. In 2019, they were awarded the title of Hero of Ukraine for their incredible courage. The story of the Chernobyl divers is a powerful testament to the human spirit in the face of overwhelming disaster. They were not soldiers or comic book heroes, they were engineers and plant workers who, when faced with an impossible choice, chose to risk everything for the sake of humanity. Their selfless act in the dark, flooded basement of Reactor 4 saved millions of lives and prevented an environmental and human disaster on a scale we can barely comprehend. They are the unsung heroes of Chernobyl, the three men who swam into the heart of the fire and saved the world. Thank you for joining us on Historical Repo. If you found this story as moving as we did, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the past.